The magic censer. Many people falsely think that the desired being or power must appear when they are merely carrying out a censoring or citation, and they are very disappointed when they, in consequence, have only partial success or no success at all. Sometimes they become the victims of their own imagination or of various kinds of hallucinations, which is even worse. I will reveal to the reader the great mystery and the symbolic meaning of the magic censer. Above all, the symbolism of the censer conceals the mystery of the materialization and condensation of the desired being or power. Since this fact is known only to a few initiates, many evocations in which the exteriorization of a being is planned go astray. As a good example of what is meant, let me compare such faulty procedure with a fish that is pulled out of its element, out of the water, under the supposition that it will go on living in the air. Later on one is not a little surprised that the fish has quickly perished. It is the same in respect of calling up beings and powers. If a being is to be called from an invisible world into this world, then an atmosphere must be created which the being will find agreeable. It would likewise be impossible for a human being to enter, with his physical body, a more subtle atmosphere without having taken the necessary measures before doing so. An appropriate disposition along with strong will and faith might, however, enable one to produce an oscillation in the own microcosm which is agreeable to the being, and one might thus be able to get into contact with a being, in a similar procedure been described in Initiation into Hermetics, i.e. in the chapter dealing with the magic of the mirror. Nevertheless, the being would, in such a case, never be able to transfer itself into our physical world to have any effects on it. Only high intelligences, spirit beings, acquainted with the laws of the physical world and knowing how to apply these as a high initiate, who knows and controls the laws of the spheres outside our physical world, are able to prepare the place for manifestation, in our case the triangle, by themselves. In the case like this, however, the magician has no possibility to use and command the being which had to produce the conditions for the projection by itself, not even then if he would create the form of the deity within himself. He would have to be satisfied with the fact that a being like that would never acknowledge him as a true magical authority, but would, on the contrary, try to deceive him deliberately, or would refuse to obey him. This kind of evocation, in which a being creates the necessary atmosphere by itself, is unfortunately practiced by sorcerers who, because of ignorance or incomplete magical development, are incapable of preparing the so-called magic space for the sighted being. The being called up by a sorcerer in such a way will, in most cases, refuse to obey, or will try to deceive the sorcerer, or even force him to agree to a contract, a pact, not to mention the menaces and the many other dangers that such a sorcerer would have to face. The case of Dr. Faustus and Mephistopheles is a striking example. I shall have a bit more to say about these two later in this book. No doubt, there have been hundreds of cases like that in the history of man. Most of them, however, have remained unknown. A genuine initiate taking all the measures and considering all the applicable analogies for ritual magic will never have to fear such a tragedy. It is therefore necessary for the magician to know well the symbolism of all magical aids and to understand them, in order to get complete control over beings and powers. The censer serves, as I have said above, as the symbolism of the materialization of a being. The magician is obliged to create the atmosphere necessary for the being he intends to evoke. He must not rely on the being to do that, for it would only create the atmosphere to suit its own desire. Otherwise the magician would be in danger of completely coming under the influence of that being. According to the oldest available mysteries on the subject, the creation of the atmosphere for a desired being of any rank was understood as adjustment to the magical space. Various instructions have been in use up to the present day. We are in possession of old Egyptian papyrus rolls giving instructions on how to bring about the necessary concentration on the magic space. But since their symbols have been misinterpreted, they have either dropped out of use or been completely misunderstood. When preparing the space for the materialization of a being, belonging to the symbolism of the censer, it is necessary that the space first be impregnated. I have already dealt with the impregnation of the space in the physical plane and with its charging for one's own or for somebody else's use in initiation into hermetics, and have pointed out there how important this impregnation, this concentration on the magic space in which the desired being or power is to manifest itself, is when preparing the censer. The quality of the impregnation of the space is dependent on the type of power or being that is to be evoked. Surely, nobody will charge the space with the principle of earth when, in fact, he wants to work with the element of fire, etc. This would not only be nonsensical, but it would also be in contradiction to the law. If, for instance, the magician works with beings of the elements, he must charge the space where he wants to have the beings, materialized with the being's own elements. Gnomes and other spirits of the earth can only appear in places filled, i.e., charged, with the elements of the earth, spirits of the water only in places charged with the elements of the water, and spirits of the air and fairies will only be manifested where the mental astral elements of the air are prevailing. Salamanders or fire spirits in a space charged with the fire element, higher beings and intelligences must have the space filled with light. This light must have the color of its planetary analogy. Extraplanetary beings can only appear in a place filled with clean white light. The exact coloring of planetary light is affected by means of imagination. Beings of the Saturn sphere will, for instance, only appear to you, if you create a violet color, the color of Saturn. Beings of the Jupiter planet will show themselves, if the color vibration is blue. The beings of the Sun appear in a golden color, those of the Mars planet in a red color, those of the Venus in a green, those of the Mercury sphere in an orange and those of the Moon in a silvery color. When working with positive beings, the coloring of the individual spheres in shiny light may only be a very slight one. The darker the color gets, the more difficult it becomes for a good being to be manifested. When operating with negative being, the appropriate color has to be deep and saturated. If one tried to get a positive being to be manifested in an impregnated space with a color of dark vibration, even if it were its appropriate color, it could happen that a negative being of the relevant planetary sphere would take on the shape of the invoked positive being, trying to play the part of the desired positive being. It is a rule that the being appears which has the characteristics of the color created. Lower beings need a darker color, i.e., a slower vibration, than higher beings, which, in fact, have a cleaner color and therefore a color with a higher vibration. When working in the open air, a certain space has to be designated by help of one's imagination. When operating in a closed room, it is essential that the whole room be charged with the appropriate element. Impregnation is either effected by breathing through the lungs or through the pores and the making use of one's imaginative powers, or by the force of imagination alone. To create the appropriate colored light or element, the magician has to use his body, which he will first load with the element or colored light and later empty it into the space via his hands and his magic wand or directly through the pores, thus filling it up and enlivening it, i.e., preparing it for the being or power to be invoked. This practice of the imaginary transfer of colored light from the magician's body into the room is used for invoking beings and powers which are to serve the magician's own purpose. However, the same method is applied in case the magician intends to intensify and project from his own body, soul and spirit i.e., from his microcosm, a quality or powers also belonging to a planetary analogy. When working with beings which are to serve people other than the magician, impregnation is only be effected by his imagination alone. The space impregnation has then to be effected directly from the universe. The desired power or being will only be able to operate and intensify itself in a space prepared in this way. If the space is sufficiently impregnated, the magician may choose to create a special condensation in the magic triangle and to form, by the help of his imagination, the shape of the being invoked. The power of condensation, or dynamics, of the appropriate element is, in so doing, of paramount importance, for the effective manifestation of the being depends wholly upon it. In order to facilitate this condensation, the magician may also apply a weak incense, the ingredients of which must, however, be be appropriate to the planetary sphere from which the being is to be called. If the magician wants to have especially strong influence for physical effects, then the appropriate condensed electric or magnetic fluid must be transferred into the shape created for the appearance while burning incense. He may also banish one of the two fluids, or, if he likes, both fluids, in this case called electromagnetic fluid. Initiation into Hermetics, chapter on vaulting, into a fluid condenser, which, in consequence, will be used by the being for becoming physically effective. If, however, the magician intending to materialize a being does not insist on its appearance in a special form and does not mind if the being appears without any shape, or in a shape chosen by itself, then the surface of the liquid or solid fluid condenser placed within the triangle has to be charged with the appropriate electromagnetic volt whilst the magician is concentrating on the wish that the being may use this power for effecting the desired results. The reader will find the necessary instructions for creating this volt charge in the shape of a ball with an electric inside and a magnetic outside in Initiation into Hermetics in the chapter dealing with vaulting. There, too, all laws, for instance, the one on the duration of an effect, etc., have to be considered. Physical incensing with the necessary ingredients will only facilitate the creation of the electromagnetic fluid. Possibly, the magician will have to use it in the beginning if in need of something to support his concentration on the matter. But it is not essential at all, and a good magician, having all the laws perfectly under his control, can certainly do without it. The use of narcotic ingredients, as suggested in many books on exorcism, will be avoided by a true magician, for such narcotics, apart from their intoxicating effects, do not actually help to invoke the desired being, but merely cause hallucinations or similar projections in the subconsciousness of the desired being. A genuine magician will, therefore, never risk his health by such or similar experiments. If the magician intends to have dead people or any other beings living in the Akasha world or the astral world appear in front of him, or if he wants to use them for certain other purposes, then he has to impregnate the space with the Akasha in the way described above, and he has to use the electromagnetic fluid as a volt charge or to create one. I shall, however, return to this subject and give a broader description of it in one of the next chapters dealing with necromancy.